All right, my friends, thank you for coming. Welcome to, I think it's session number 4, I believe, of our Parents Connect. We had Amanda talk to us for the first couple of weeks, and then we had Joe and Yin speak to us a fortnight ago as well, which was fantastic. That should be loaded up very soon on our community page, I believe. But tonight we get the privilege of hearing from Duke. And so Duke is the director and runs all of our youth ministries, the Emerge Youth at Clayton Church of Christ. And he's been doing that for coming up to 2 years now, I believe. On top of that, Duke is also he's a fiance, and he has a fiance. So that's pretty exciting. And he is also a school teacher, and he's an avid fisherman. So those are some interesting things that I'm sure he'll be happy to talk about, any and all of the above, but probably most and foremost, the fishing. But yeah, Duke is an incredibly well thought out dude, and whenever I chat to him about his desires and plans for youth group, it shows that he has a real heart for the youth, and also just a real wise head on him. So we're really excited to be able to chat to him this evening. But yeah, we might just jump straight into it. Duke, is there anything about yourself that I've missed that is important to share?
I think you've literally summed up everything very well. I think that was a pretty good introduction. In fact, if I was to kind of think about all the stuff I would say about myself, that would pretty much be it, and probably in that order as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, the only other thing I'd add is probably, other than coordinating youth, I've been a youth leader for quite a number of years now, maybe about 12 or 13 years, since I was 18 actually. Yeah, so I've just youth is a pretty big part of something that I felt that God's called me to since I was young. But yeah.
Brilliant.
That was a good introduction.
Awesome. I'm glad I nailed it. I'll keep that one in the video. So yes, I guess most of us here are relatively familiar with the youth in some fashion at Clayton Church of Christ. But yeah, Duke, tell us what is Emerge Youth like? What happens there? And I guess in a bigger, broader sense, what are some things you're hoping to see happen at Emerge Youth?
Yeah, it's pretty chaotic at youth group. Now, so we run a program that often happens on Friday nights for a couple of hours, and really, in terms of I guess our vision and our goals, they're pretty much the same as the church's vision. We really believe in the idea of that every person, including teenagers, are a disciple that represents Jesus to everyone, everywhere, with everything. And so it's the same as the church vision, but I guess the way that I see youth group is that expression looks a little bit different when you're a young person, because as a teenager you go through different sets of issues that you would, let's say, as an adult or whatever. And so we put a focus on representing Jesus to to their peers, to their friends, to living life as a teenager. And in this year, 2020, our focus is kind of around this idea of being anchored to Jesus. And it comes from Hebrews 6, where it talks about we have this hope as an anchor to the soul. And so, we often run on Fridays. And this term is particularly life group based through Zoom, but we also actually spend a bit of time hanging out on Wednesdays as well. So yeah, I guess that's just really our goal. It's just to see our kids anchored to Jesus, representing him, and especially to know him in a deep and intimate way.
That's really cool. That's a great thing, and I'm quite excited about that. But as you may or may not be aware, Emerge Youth sort of only happens on one night a week. That is usually in a normal sort of season. It happens on a Friday night from, say, 7-ish till whenever the parents can come and pick them up. So sometimes the next morning, I don't know. But that's one.
It's always
one
later
part
than
of a week.
Yeah,
that's like one little section of a week where you guys get a chance to interact with the kids. How important is it for the parents to actually be quite actively involved in their kids' faith?
Yeah, that's a really good. That's a good point. I think the quick answer is that it's super important. It's kind of I guess the way you would view church as not being the only source of faith for people, that we need to think beyond beyond just the Sunday, rocking up to church on Sunday as being our Christian duties or whatever. But in terms of the importance of a person's faith, a young person's faith, I think discipleship has to start in the home. And I think that's the first point for kids and teenagers, that the first and probably and still the best mentor and leader that they will have in their lives are always going to be their parents. And so that means that parents play more of an important role in shaping the faith of young people than we ever could hope to imagine as youth leaders, as their friends, or any other community that they are in. Now, that's not to say that like youth group doesn't play a role. I think, kind of thinking about my experience, that, I actually didn't grow up as a Christian. My parents were Buddhist. And so my parents didn't play any role in shaping my Christian faith whatsoever. But I attended youth group as a teenager, and that really changed my life. And it made me into the kind of person that I am today. But having grown up in that context, I actually now see that it's really important that parents are actively involved in the faith of their kids. And I really think that like when the kids have that firm foundation, they'll then be able to build and expand on that through avenues like church and youth group, peers, and other things like that.
That's sort of exciting and sort of a little terrifying as a parent. I was sort of hoping that like 90% of the work would be done by you guys, and then maybe 10% would be something that I could do. Yes.
Yeah. No, I think like I do think that sometimes there is this this burden that does feel like, how much of it is parents' responsibility, how much of it is like not parents' responsibility. But I think at the end of the day, that we are called to follow Jesus, and that's I think that's the first thing, and understanding that comes with a lot of grace as well.
Yeah, that's cool, man. Well, I guess, seeing as parents play such an important part in just the overall makeup of any of their children, what are some of the things that you think really make a big difference in that parents can do that make a big difference in the faith of the youth?
Yeah, I like what you mentioned earlier about that feeling of that gravity of feeling that responsibility. I think quite simply, as a youth leader over the years, and then more so, I guess, as a youth coordinator, I think the most important thing is not an action or a routine or a particular instance that parents exhibit, but it's actually just living a life that is genuinely engaged in their own faith. I think that is actually the biggest factor. Kids that have grown the most and consistently in terms of their faith and their freedom to kind of wrestle with the big questions of faith and Jesus and God, they're kids of parents who've set the example by doing the same thing themselves, that they're willing to wrestle with those things and willing to grow in that process and change to become more like Jesus. And what that, I think, in my opinion, what that does is sets a much more firm role, like a role model or example, like example for kids to follow as well. So I think that the biggest impact that a parent can actually make is actually just following Jesus themselves, being genuine about their faith, integrating it into their everyday life, being intentional, and I would say probably making it visible to the kids that you are doing so. I think that's actually what makes a big difference. Just the same way that, like, as a youth leader, the best thing that I would be able to do for the kids in my youth group is to engage with my own faith as a foundation for my leadership.
Yeah. And so I guess ideally, if things worked in sort of the greatest sort of like the best ideal situation, it would be that not everything is happening at home and not everything is happening at youth group, but there's actually a bit of a partnership, a collaboration between the two. With obviously, you guys have a heart that the home is the birthplace of a lot of the discipleship and where the majority of it happens. But in a really like cohesive, wonderful situation, both things would be working together in some fashion, what would it look like, or how can parents, I guess, partner or tag team with the Emerge youth group to help with the growing of their kids?
Yeah, like I think that parents actually, in terms of our youth group, I feel like parents are already doing an awesome job. So I don't really want it to come across as if this is what parents need to do in terms of our youth group, because I think that parents already do such a wonderful job in supporting our youth group. And actually, like since I've stepped into this role, I actually feel I've received a lot of support from parents, and a lot of them have just been so encouraging when I speak to them. And so, like, I already feel like I appreciate the work that our parents do already, and I want it to come through that tone. Yeah, so I think one of the best things that I have found as being effective in kind of working together with parents in the best interest of their kids. It's just having more of an open dialogue between what goes on at the home and then what goes on at youth group, because we put the kids in the middle, and then if we are able to kind of have this kind of willingness to be able to communicate clearly with each other about what's happening at youth group, what's happening at home, then I feel like that's actually a stepping stone to move forward. So, for example, I hear stories about things that our youth are doing at home, like they're trying new things, taking up new hobbies or passions, or they're exploring their faith and questioning it. And then we're hearing the same message that's happening at home as it is happening at youth group. And that's actually really awesome to hear. So when the kids are hopefully being challenged at youth group when we speak about certain topics, and then they go home, and then that conversation continues at home, that actually gives the kids a lot of opportunities to like just wrestle with it, like just actually keep digging, and not just kind of like stop when Friday night rolls around and we're like, oh yep, we're done, and then the rest of the week they kind of just go on with the rest of their lives. But it's that ongoing journey that the kids are able to keep having, and then along the way, they come Friday night, they hopefully get challenged by youth group, and then maybe on a Wednesday night or a Tuesday night, that conversation continues around the dinner table at home, or things like that. I think that's a very organic way to kind of tag team.
Yeah. So I guess out of that is a potential help that the parents can offer in this is some sort of communication from the home to the youth group leaders, um, like saying, hey, this is what's going on at home. This is sort of maybe the vibe or the temperature of our family at the moment. These are some of the things that have happened in, little Johnny's life or in little Johnny's parents' life. We think it's probably playing on their mind, or for better or worse. I think it's actually a good idea for you as a youth leader to know. Is that something that you would probably encourage or like to see a bit more of?
Yeah, I think it can kind of go both ways. So for example, yeah, if we recognize that what are the specific issues that that the kids at Clayton Church are actually facing, that helps us as youth leaders just tailor and address those issues more specifically. And so we don't feel like we know the kids better than parents do. You know what I mean? So it's like we don't really know all of those things that's happening in their lives, because we occupy that one bracket of time. And so if we hear about struggles that they're facing at home, that helps us kind of go, okay, well then how do we address that in a way that the kids can relate with? And then on the flip side, it would be the same, that let's say if parents are having this conversation with kids about what they've been learning at youth group, or what are some of the things they've been doing at youth group, or what are some things they want to see at youth group, then we can then bring that back to to myself and my leaders, and then we can actually we can work together with parents in that kind of way.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. I think we've been, yeah, I guess we're discussing this sort of collaboration between home and youth,
Mm.
but I would say, and you said you don't know the kids more than the parents do. Like you see them for a very small portion of time, but I feel that within that portion of time, you also probably get to see a different side of the kids than the parents might. maybe a less inhibited, a less sort of restricted, and with that, you probably get a bit of an understanding of who they might want to be if they were allowed to be. And I guess I'm just wondering, what, yeah, what are some skills that maybe the parents could start doing at home or teaching their kids at home to sort of like engage with that other side of them?
Yeah. And that, I think, like, so I'm not a parent, and in case you guys didn't know, I don't have kids, and I'm not married, so I can't really, like, I suppose from that perspective, I wouldn't answer this question in what it would be, asking your parents, because I've never kind of experienced it. So maybe what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lean on my education background here, and I would probably I want to teach you guys a little bit about kind of like child and teenage development from a psychological perspective, and then maybe kind of branch from there. Let me introduce you guys to the hand model of brain development by Daniel Siegel, who's a renowned child psychologist. So he came up with this this kind of theory to help kids process their way of thinking, right? And so he talks about the brain of a person is kind of being like a closed fist, right? So you kind of, if you were to put your thumb in the middle and then you wrap your fingers around it, that's kind of like a way of interpreting some of the different parts of the brain, right? So the thumb being in the middle, right? In our brain, that's called the limbic system, and it contains a few different components, like the amygdala and stuff like that. And it's basically your survival instinct, yeah? So it controls your emotional response. It controls instinctive behavior, flight or fight, and things like that. So your emotional center kind of sits right in there, right? And then around the outside of it, wrapping around the limbic system, is called the cortex. And that's like part of your brain that is responsible for logic, rationality, reasoning, and information processing, right? And so the cortex covers the limbic system, because what happens is when you make decisions that are survival based, so you go for a walk and you see, I don't know, like a snake or a spider, right? This little part here fires, and that kind of creates a very flight or fight, and like induces a lot of stress and anxiety, and makes you kind of act impulsively to try and survive, right? But then if you're doing other things, like, if you were only behaving from this area, it's like, it'd be exhausting living life that way, right? But so you have this kind of development of a cortex that kind of rationalizes, processes the information, and kind of in a logical and a reasonable way, right? And so like, if you were to imagine this system, right? That's how our brains normally work. If we see a snake and then we freak out, but we realize that it's about 3 meters away. If I just calmly step back the way I came and then walked away, then I'd be all good. And that's kind of our cortex processing through the limbic system, right? And giving some sort of rationality in decision making. Now, here's the kicker: in children and in teenagers, this outer cortex layer, like, that's not fully developed until the age of 25. So any person under the age of 25 have not fully developed a logic center or a rational way of processing some of their emotions. And so some of their decision making is actually drawn from this emotional response, flight or flight, trying to survive, right? And so they haven't fully formed the information processing part until they reach well into kind of like 25 or adulthood, right? And so kids, teenagers, and young adults, sometimes they will think and act with their emotions and not logic. And that's, I think we all know that, right? Because it explains why, an 11-year-old might have, I don't know, like a panic attack at the thought of doing an oral presentation, which, to be honest, I think a lot of people have panic attacks even as adults to do an oral presentation. But or the fact that maybe like your child probably could go to sleep at 2 a.m. because they've got a test tomorrow or something like that, or they're going to start that new mission on Call of Duty and stay up to 4 a.m. playing for the next 2 hours. I mean, that's an emotional decision, right? And so that part, it's because their cortex is still developing and they're still learning how to process information rationally, logically, and things like that. So concepts like logic, reasoning, things like delayed gratification, and are actually, they're not instinctive. We take them for granted because as an adult, we've grown to develop those parts of our brain. Whereas I think for young people, what's important is actually empowering them to think, so to say, with a closed fist, and to think, to apply logic and reasoning, and to kind of process their emotions in a way that will help them grow in their brain development, psychologically. And so, yeah, so I think from that perspective, that kind of brings in all of the things like what skills, in my opinion, what the skills that are important in helping the kids kind of for later on are the skills that develop this area of their brain,
Right.
and help them to think through that avenue.
So you'd be saying, this is from my sake because I'm a simple man, you'd be saying that a helpful skill for us to teach our kids young is not so much maybe reprimanding them for maybe an emotional response that they have, but actually spending time learning how we can teach them how to actually engage with their emotional responses and actually learn how to process them in a, I guess, a helpful as opposed to harmful type of way.
Yeah. I think teaching them to, rather than suppressing certain emotions, learn to process them, whether that be verbally out loud, or teaching them kind of how to process through things in a rational kind of way, give it some context, and not have kids act impulsively on their emotions all the time. Teaching things like delayed gratification, and the importance of aspects of their life like routine, structure, study habits, all those things. And I think in terms of faith, a good skill that the kids can learn is the importance of a consistent devotional life. I think that's something that they can grow in, and it doesn't come instinctively like we would, I guess, take for granted.
Yeah. So I guess, yeah, as a teacher, you would have some of these, I guess, teaching methods, and that, what would that, might look like at home? So you've mentioned a couple, like say delayed gratification, so not giving them everything that they want straight away, or making them choose a little now or waiting for more later, or stuff like that. What would be maybe some methodologies or teaching skills that, what could it look like in the family unit?
Yeah, I think for a young person, and this is from both, I guess, my own upbringing and also as a teacher, and seeing this in my students at school, one of the big things that I think the kids need, especially during this kind of development stage where their brains are literally growing and changing, one of the most important things that kids actually need is stability, and stability in things like routine and structure, I think, are so important for kids, not just for schooling, but just to kind of keep them well grounded amidst the changes of emotions that they experience in life. So if they know that, that this is kind of the routine that they have, whether it be for school or for, sporting clubs or their faith life, I think routine really helps ground kids. And it helps them feel like there's something that they can trust in and hold on to, even though their emotions are creating all sorts of weird responses as they process through things. Like and I'm not saying it's like down to the T, but in general, having a consistent routine. And I think, as adults, we understand that routine's important in our lives because, when we don't have routine, we feel like we're all over the place and we get more stressed and more anxious about things. And so having structure, having a calendar or things like that helps keep us in check. And likewise, it probably is going to look a little bit different for a teenager than it would for an adult. But that routine and structure, I think, are very consistent ways that kids can help manage their emotions and ground themselves.
Right. So I'm a visual person. But I'm not an engineer, so feel free to correct me. But in my mind, so that looks like when they build skyscrapers, they understand that there's going to be some version of flex within the building. And
Mm.
so they build the building so that it can accommodate the movement and the flex. So there's like they actually build the ground floors nice and deep and strong so that when the upper parts of the building move, it doesn't actually topple the building over. It can actually withstand that
Mm-hmm.
movement. And you're saying like a really helpful home life is one that actually gives maybe their young people the chance to move and experience emotions and process emotions while also having quite a stable home base. Is that, yeah.
Yeah, I like that analogy. That's a pretty cool analogy.
Right, you guys can write that one
uh,
down if you want.
yeah, that's a good
Tim,
one.
I noticed that you wanted to maybe ask something.
Yeah, I've got a question. Can we change the topic slightly?
Yeah.
Or just any questions? Yeah. And this is, I don't really have any answers, and so I'm not expecting sort of a full answer. I mean, to solve it, but I'd appreciate your perspectives. And it's when I reflect on other people like my peers who've gone through, or just people I know, and you know they grew up perhaps with me in high school, and I'd say they had some sort of honest faith then, and then you just see drop off. So the first, I guess, common departure point is when kids finish high school and they go into uni or whatever comes after high school, and sort of the big world opens up to them, and then maybe after that there's they start working, and at each stage people sort of drop off,
Mm.
and I've often asked myself, what is it like? What is it with people who have that resilient, robust, enduring faith and real relationship that sort of carries them through? And what is it that we can do with people who are still in their formative years, in high school years, to develop that? And I know there's so many variables, and there's no like one thing that you can, if you get this right, then they're going to last the distance.
Yeah.
But in your view, or anyone in this room, in this Zoom call, what are some of the things that are really going to make a big difference early on if we can sort of cultivate those things?
Yeah, I was just discussing it with Joe. I think one big factor that I've observed would be accountability and peer group. I think it's even applicable for people in our age group. That like when you start having kids, some people go into isolation, and then they refuse accountability. And then I'm sure Tim as well. We have a lot of friends who are families who have stopped going to church. So I think it's the same for youth. I think it's really important to have strong, grounded Christian peers. Yeah.
So, in terms of like, these are just my thoughts. In terms of, say, the youth demographic, I feel like maybe there's three things that I would probably chuck out there as really, really important. And I shouldn't have said three, because by the time I get to the third, I'll forget the third. But the first one is what Yin just said, which was having a really solid peer group, or a really good relationship with people of a similar age who are going through similar things. I think a few weeks ago, someone asked a question of Amanda, like, oh, my kid is asking a question about every single thing to do with schooling at home. Like every single thing that we're doing, they've got a question about. Like, can't they figure it out on their own? And Amanda mentioned something like, well, at school, they've got all these other kids to ask the questions, so they don't have to ask the question every time, because sometimes, Johnny's going to ask the question, and Sarah's going to ask the question, and Susie's going to ask the question. And so you actually get to share the information amongst you, so it's not always you. And I think for myself growing up, having a group of like 4 or 5 guys who are in my age bracket, and we all got to experience faith ever so slightly as our life experience, slightly differently, as our life experience differed ever so slightly. And so we actually got to see what it looked like in different life versions, where, some people with single parents, some people with Christian homes, some people with non-Christian homes, you actually got to look and see how they experienced life together. A second part was when it was less about, say, rule following and being quite legalistic about, say, what the Bible says about this, and more important about like how do I phrase this in a way that works? It was more important about like, how does this actually affect my life? Like, how does the Bible, how do I actually interpret what's happening around me from what I find in scripture, as opposed to being able to quote scripture and name all the books in order and all that, actually being able to process life issues based on truths that I found in the scripture was really important. And then the third thing was to do with my parents. And sometimes they did this amazingly, and other times they probably fell down in it as well, like we all will. And that was showing that faith was important to them, because a lot of people are realizing, I'm not going to church on Sunday anymore, and nothing in my life changes. It has made no change in my life when I stopped going to church on Sunday, because faith never actually spoke into your life in the first place. And that's what I saw from my parents. So those would probably be the three things that I would say. But yeah.
Could I add something as well?
Please.
I'll probably go from the perspective of a youth kid. So I think, Tim, you asked, how do we kind of address that in those formative years when they are in high school and when they're when they're young? I would say that I think, yeah, it is very multifaceted. But if there's one thing that I have noticed, and I think is quite meaningful to me in terms of my understanding of kids' faith, is humility. Just the need for a savior. I think it doesn't matter what stage of life you are at. I think that Christians are marked by their understanding that they are sinful, broken people. And so we need a savior. We need Jesus. We need God. And I think the tragedy is that as people grow older, when they become proud, they think that they don't need God. And so they abandon faith. And so for a young person, when they're living that emotional life, right? And every weekend's a nightmare because the person that they have a crush on doesn't like them back or whatever, right? They're desperately crying out for Jesus every week.
That never happened to me.
No, I'm not talking to anybody here. But I think when a young person's in their high school years or their teenage years, their life is so emotional and up and down that they see that need. And so they reach out to God maybe initially because of that, right? And if they don't have all those things like, proper engagement with faith, all that kind of stuff, then I think definitely that makes a big difference. But then when they grow older and they kind of mellow out a little bit, I think they can become proud and abandon the need for God and realize, hold on, I'm doing fine just exerting hard work and my own efforts.
Yeah.
And whether they explicitly say it or not, I think that they've lost their need for God. Whereas I think that pride makes us blind to think that we've accomplished those things on ourselves, when actually, as we grow older, I think we just need to realize more how broken we are even more.
Yeah. That's really good. Anyone else want to get do preaching on Sunday? Yep, we voted it in.
Slide them in.
Yeah.
I'm good. This already makes my hands sweaty. So.
Thanks, Duke. Amanda, did you want to share something?
I mean, like I was doing youth quite a few years as well, and I've been through it myself. And I think another reason why some of them drop out is that, from my, well, not my experience, but my experience with some of my peers who have dropped out, is that they either feel like they've sinned, or they've gone out, like say with a non-Christian or something, or they've done something bad in their eyes and they feel ashamed about it. And I think they just feel like it's not worth staying at church and having to deal with the thought that people might be judging them. And then so they just leave, Yeah. And so I think, I don't know what the solution is, because I actually think, like say Clayton is a very non-judgmental, very accepting church. But I guess it's about creating a culture that lets the young people know that, we all stuff up. And if you stuff up, it's okay. Yeah. So I don't know if that's like what's been happening. But I see that's been a bit of a trend as well in the past for us. Yeah. With people dropping out. Yeah.
If young people in our church were finding that they're starting to step away from faith, or they're feeling some sort of disgruntled or disconnection, or maybe like they're feeling attacked or judged in some fashion, that's a really good opportunity for us to say, what does this say about the way that I treat them? What does this say about the type of persona and attitude that I put out there? I'm not saying it's all the older people's fault and it's never the young person's fault, but I think it's also a really good opportunity for us to look at the way that we are actually projecting certain values and ideals towards them in that. Yeah. Duke, did you want to add to anything? You don't have to if you don't want to.
No, I think that was pretty good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, Moses?
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head there, because one of the things which I'm finding it true in my own household here is how much our daughter mirrors our our actions, our attitudes towards other people, and you know, she really gives voice to the very things that we are voicing out ourselves. And I suppose if kids see a disconnect between the faith that you say you have and your actions, then that really affects how they would approach their own discipleship. And that is why, yeah, I think if anything that we can all take back from tonight, it is that we really need to look at our own discipleship, because the best youth program, as we have discovered, is really nothing, and will not get the results that we desire if there is a disconnect between what they are learning in church or learning in youth and what they are seeing at home.
Yeah, and scripture talks about like a house turned against itself won't stand. So yeah. Hey, Duke, a couple more questions to chuck in, because I'm exiting this at 9:15. There's no more Survivor to watch, but I'm still exiting at 9:15. I guess this one is hopefully a helpful one for the parents, and that is, are there things that parents need to start talking about in front of their youth? So growing up, my parents did speak about a lot of things in front of me, but there was still a lot of conversations that happened behind closed doors. And so I'm just wondering, yeah, are there conversations that you would recommend that parents start having in front of their children?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, yeah, I think that it helps, definitely. Transparency is really, I think it's been one of the recurring themes that we've been talking about tonight, that in many ways kids need to be able to see what our life and our faith actually looks like at the home. And so being transparent with them about some of your life and hardships is really important. You know, we recognize that, you know, we're not saving them by sheltering them from the hardships and struggles that they're going to go through in life anyway. So it's not about how much can we bubble wrap our kids so that when the time comes, they'll be mature enough to handle, but rather recognizing that maturity comes when they have this kind of guided exposure to those issues, and then they've got the tools that they have to deal with them.
Guided exposure. That's a good phrase. Yes.
That's the teaching phrase. So I think some of the teachers might already know some of those words. It's in our guided exposure policy for school. So yeah. I just stole the words. So I think, yeah, I think that it's always helpful to kind of talk about with some measure of wisdom and discretion about some of the things that, as a parent, that you struggle with, because I think that kids see that, and rather than judge it, they respect that, because they know that, hold on, my parents are just as, you know, they're still trying to work this out just as much as I'm trying to work out my teenage years. They're trying to work out what it's like to be a parent of a teenager for the first time, or whatever. I think particularly what is helpful though is, I don't know if you guys ever watched this show called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And it was an old show that was was aired in like the 90s or the 80s or something like that, right? But the host, he actually brought up a lot of kind of really important issues that he knew that kids in primary school would encounter in the realities of life, how to process things like death and whatever, where it might not have been talked about in the home or been avoided, but he kind of doesn't shy away from that. I think in the same way, being open and honest about the emotions that a teenager would go through. And I guess sometimes you just have to kind of just remember what your teenage life was like to kind of remember, hold on, the predominant emotions that my kids might be feeling about and need to kind of have a place to be able to verbalize and be able to witness and see how it's being processed could include things like managing their anger, or how to be forward-footed, forward stepping, how to step out rather than step back in terms of their responses to situations that they don't see as being, as being right. How to manage anxiety, how to, that kind of the emotions that teenagers will go through are the ones that, we have probably been through and have processed. And so speaking about those things with the kids would actually really help, that to reassure them that, hold on, it is okay for you to feel angry and to feel anxious, but what does that look like? And this is how maybe, mum and dad deal with it. So, like if you're having a very anxious day, rather than hiding yourself in your room and not letting your kids see that anxiety, maybe, it's not such a bad idea. And I'm not saying do this all the time, but it's not such a bad idea to actually process that emotion in front of them. So they know that, hold on, what mum and dad does is they talk to each other about it. They resolve that in front of me rather than behind closed doors. And then you can empower kids to do the same thing. Like when we're at youth group and kids kind of bring up and we talk about some of these issues, I guess one of the ways that we have to understand is that we bring these issues up and challenge kids on aspects of their faith and the emotions that Bible characters go through. What does it feel like for Joseph to have felt abandoned by his brothers, and how would he have processed that in the Bible and so forth? So I think it's like, as leaders, we're not afraid to kind of just challenge the kids that this is what we go through as leaders. And I think if kids can see that, they understand that leaders are working it out as well. And I think that in the same way, parents can do the same thing.
Yeah, that's really good.
And can I squeeze in a kind of almost an attachment to that? The second thing isn't necessarily about talking, but rather about listening. I think it was Pastor Ken who taught me this, and Pastor Ken was an old senior pastor at our church many years ago, and he was also my youth leader. But Pastor Ken used to say that you should listen twice as much as you talk, because God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, in kind of Pastor Ken fashion, right? But it has such a profound impact on me relating to my youth, because kids want to talk. I mean, they might be silent at the start, but once you get them out of their shell, sometimes they don't shut up, right? And so listening actually opens up a child or a person or a teenager better than good advice.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
Just wanted to know, though, what would you say would be like the top 5 common issues that youth actually bring forth to talk about in that safe space, either with the youth leaders or at youth meetings, just to understand like what's in their headspace, like what's out there right now?
So like our youth kids at our church, is that what you mean? Like, what are some of the top things that they are actually strong? Like I think that's a good point. I would probably say I wouldn't say that they're in this order, but these are 5 things that I think maybe are fairly important. And I don't know if I'll get the 5, but I'm going to try, right? Number 1, kids get anxious about school and achievement. I think that's a big issue for a lot of kids in our generation, that they feel like they need to perform. I don't know where it comes from, because I don't always feel that parents project that, but somehow the kids are feeling this need to perform, and sometimes they don't know how to process that struggle. So their identity needs to be grounded firmly, not in this idea that they are born with a certain level of intelligence and they're stuck in that kind of way or whatever, but that they can actually grow and fail well, and that's okay. I think anxiety is a big thing, and that's attached to academics and performance, but I think it goes much deeper than that. That it's this kind of fear of rejection that they generally feel. I think our kids at youth group feel a certain level of anxiety around some of those things. I think other things can include, for a subset of our youth kids and just the generation as a whole, relationships. They don't really know how to process liking someone, and they feel a lot of brokenness attached to it. And I think everyone probably went through this when they were in high school, but relationship really messes a kid up. And so knowing how to process those things with good boundaries, with, good interactions and stuff like that, are really important. I think for a few others of our kids, I would say this one's particularly for boys, actually. They struggle with anger. And it looks a little bit different in the younger generation, but it's a silent anger. And it's one where they're suppressing their emotions and they don't know how to express it. So I think that's been and I think, to be honest, it's a general thing that I feel like a lot of guys feel anyway. And self-esteem. Yeah. So self-image, body image, whatever they see, they live in a world where technology is at the touch of a button, which also means that the messages that they're receiving from media, advertisement, if from their peers, Snapchat, Instagram, it's all sending this message of, if you do this, you will look better, or you will have more value, or whatever. So those I think, would be 5 things that I think, that the kids are struggling with, that both in terms of our generation, and maybe if you can probably expand it to think about kids in general.
Thanks, Duke. That's ridiculously helpful, and I think really challenging, because I think in order for us to speak about a lot of those things, and to speak about it from like a personal viewpoint, probably will require a whole lot of courage and vulnerability from the parents. And I'm not sure that's something that we always like to do. Like, my son thinks I'm the strongest person in the world, and he might be right, but he's probably not. And the other week I hurt my back and I could not play with him for a fortnight. Like, there was 2 weeks where I couldn't get down to play with him and hang out with him. And I had to daily remind him, Dad is just not able to play with you right now because my back is broke, it's sore. I need to fix it in some fashion. And that was and that's quite, noticeable and visible. But if we were to then talk about hey, sorry, we can't do that right now because emotionally I'm feeling quite sensitive, or the reason I responded this way is because I'm struggling to do something with work and I need to learn how to process that better. That requires a whole lot of vulnerability from a parent to be able to do that. But I would dare say that it actually would mean a whole lot to the kids being able to, or the youth being able to see that actually happen from their parents, people that they really do hold up in high regard. So yeah, thank you for that massive challenge. I do want to leave a little. Yes.
So I just want to ask Doug, if you, the leaders, identify some of the issues that the youth are facing, do you, how do you see that you need to relate that to the parents, or encourage the youth to discuss that with the parents? Is that what you would do, the leaders?
Yeah. I think these kind of issues, it's not like they can be resolved within a few conversations, or because they're so deep rooted in a person's identity, and there are issues that people carry probably into adulthood as well. And so when we bring these things up in life group, sometimes like it's just as hard to get the kids to kind of open up and share about it. And so, you know, and one of the consistent messages that we always try to get kids to understand is that 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 we as youth leaders, we're here for a season of life, and so they're going to come to youth group week in, week out for a couple of years, and then they're going to finish high school, and then they're going to move on. And chances are we're not going to be able to be there for them and to be able to be that kind of sounding board that they can talk to all the time. But we always share with them the importance of being part of the family and being able to be open and honest with their family members. And so I think we like a consistent message has always been that discipleship is first and foremost in the home, and that their parents are there to be able to listen and bring and kind of bring these things forward. But sometimes like we hit a wall, just like parents would hit a wall, that the kids might hear it, they might even agree with it, but then when push comes to shove, they'll get to this position where, do I share with my parents this or not? And actually, if they take that leap of faith and they do it, that's a breakthrough in the kids' lives, that they've learned to trust their parents with their brokenness. Yeah, so I'll give you an example. So on maybe 2 weeks ago, we played a game, an icebreaker game, where kids had to grab one of their family members, and then they had to introduce their family members to the life group and say one positive thing about their family member in front of the life group. So it was meant to be a way of getting to know each other's family members. But some of the kids just couldn't do it. They couldn't mouth it out. They couldn't bring it out because there's this big embarrassment barrier that they feel about encouraging their own family members in front of their friends or in front of their peers. And so there's this kind of like this block that they feel. And you can see that for some kids, that kind of their home life is much more conducive for them to speak words of encouragement to one another. And so it was so natural, it just kind of flowed right out of their mouths. But for other kids, they would just kind of make a joke out of it or palm it off a little bit. And so I think that kids feel that at different levels. Yeah. But
sorry. Go ahead. And to add to that, like, I think maybe in that question, there's a bit of a wondering about like, hey, if my kid comes and speaks to Duke about, say, some anxiety that he's going through, will that filter down to me eventually? Like, will I, get a call or an email about that? Like, how is that passed on? And I think there's sort of two parts to that. And one is, I think the youth group leaders are in a really privileged position where Duke himself, but also the team that he leads, are really stand-up quality people that the church trusts to talk to the youth about this sort of stuff. And so if the youth choose to speak to them about that, they have the church's backing to talk about that and to listen and to share about that without the need to pass that information straight on to the parents, unless it's something that is harmful to the kids. That's obviously a different sort of ball game. But the kids feel like there's a safety in that, and they trust the youth leaders to a certain extent, that it stays within that safe place. But I will say, more often than not, we would probably feel that it's on the onus of the children to speak to the parents about it, when really, if we were to think about it, it should be the onus of the parents to bring up that subject with the kids. And I'll give a really easy example is like, I've done so many different camps and so many different youth groups, and like the kids will bring something up and we're like, hey, when you go home, the first thing you should do is chat to your mom and dad and say, hey, on this camp, this happened. On this camp, this breakthrough happened, or I shared about this challenge that I have. You need to go and share with your parents about this. That's a 14-year-old kid going up to their 35-year-old parent or 40-year-old parent or whatever and being like, hey, I'm going to bring up this really important topic, this really sensitive topic off my own back. When in reality, I think it would be really helpful if the parents sort of like just continuously spoke about some of these things that are happening in their kids' lives. Just like, hey, how does school actually make you feel? If you were to fail, the next 3 assignments or the next whatever exams, how would you feel about that? Like, do you feel like we put too much pressure on you to get straight A's? hey, are there any other people in your life that you like a little bit? Or like, you know, how do you understand relationships? Have you ever had a boyfriend before? Have you ever kissed someone? Like, I think we should actually start really broaching the subjects ourselves as parents, because there are some kids that are really brave and will be able to find the courage to go and speak it to their parents. And that is amazing. That's a massive step. But I think as parents, the onus is actually on us to probably just start cycling through some of the questions, some of the topics that we know that we would have struggled with as like as a yeah, when in reality parents know that kids are dealing with anxiety, parents know that boys are worrying about porn, parents know that kids, you know, don't understand how relationships work. Like, we know these things. And so I think probably the more helpful thing in terms of what we could do as parents is to actually prompt that conversation ourselves. Because yeah, I think the youth leaders are in this incredibly like privileged position of being in this safe space where the youth feel like they can bring it up, but then for them to bring it up with the parents is a massive undertaking, and not something that we can sort of just assume that they'll be able to do on their own.
Could I sneak one thing in there?
Please.
On a practical level, so building on what Carl was saying, one of the things that I find particularly helpful for me and my students at school and youth kids is that sometimes kids don't know how to bring it up just yet. You can throw them a lifeline by sitting them down and actually saying, I just want to let you know that I want to listen to you and I want to be there for you if you have something that you are going through. And when you feel comfortable talking to me about it, I want to try my best to listen to you. And if you throw the lifeline out there, it allows kids to know that when they feel like they've worked up that courage, or when they feel comfortable to, or when they're encountering something that they're finding overwhelming, that they know that, okay, mom or dad has said that to me back then, and they might take that, they'll take that initiative and they'll come to you and go, hey, mom or dad, remember when you said this? Can I talk to you about something now? And you often find that the kids might feel like they've got the freedom to do that after you throw the lifeline out. Because before that, it's like you just don't know. And so you don't really know what topic to bring up. But if you just say, I want to listen to you and I want, you know, to be there for you, that's one way of just throwing the lifeline out there. And then when the time comes, like, you know, listen and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Hey guys, it's hit 9:16 p.m. so we've run over time. I apologize. Please accept my humblest apologies. I did have one more question about how can we help support the youth leaders, and I feel like maybe that's just an important one to hear. So yeah, apologies if you want to hang in for just a couple more minutes, but I just wanted to give Duke maybe the opportunity to be, hey, this is how you can help us.
Yeah. I'll just say maybe one practical thing that you can actually help us with. So we actually have a handful of parents who are really awesome at helping us with supper on a Friday night. So if you kind of don't know, youth parents actually organize our supper for us on a Friday night, and that is, you know, one or two parents come in and they consistently you know, cook some sort of like snack food or finger food or whatever for the kids to eat at the end of the night. And that's one area that that we actually would really appreciate helping. It's a very practical and easy thing. Kids aren't fussy eaters, so they'll eat whatever you put in your hand. And so we really appreciate it if you are interested, just let me know, shoot me an email. I think that's my one thing that I'll sort of leave.
Cool. Thank you. Look, I want to say a massive thank you to you, Duke, for coming tonight and sharing with us, but also a really big thank you to all of the work that you've done, you know, over the years, and especially in the last 2 years as being like the Emerge Youth, you know, director. And so, yeah, we really do appreciate not just what you do, but how you do it and who you are. When you spoke about living out your faith in front of the youth, I'll second that and be the first person in line to say that that is what you do. In the way that you discuss yourself, in the way that you discuss your relationships, in the way that you talk about like your goals and what you want to achieve, you really do exemplify that idea of like, hey, this is me living out my life based on my faith. And I think that's really good for our kids. We're excited that we have someone like you in charge of our youth program, and they're very fortunate to be under your guidance. So a massive thank you. Appreciate everything that you've shared tonight.